Hey guys, picture this. You're the richest person who's ever existed, controlling more wealth than entire modern nations. So naturally, you wake up at 4 a.m. to pray on a simple mat, right? Tonight we're following Mansa Musa through an actual day in 14th century Mali. And trust me, it looks nothing like what you'd expect from someone whose pilgrimage to Mecca literally destabilized gold markets. We're starting before sunrise in his palace, where the most powerful man in Africa begins each morning in the most humble way possible. Ready to have your assumptions shattered? But before you get really comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you are enjoying what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you over there. Now dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sleeping chamber carries the faint scent of frankincense from last night's evening prayers, mixed with the earthy smell of adobe walls. The prayer mat beside your bed, simple geometric patterns in deep blue and gold, waits with the patience of something that knows its purpose absolutely. No jewels, no golden threads, just wool and faith. Here's what's fascinating about being the wealthiest person who ever lived. Islamic prayer schedules don't care about your bank account. The call to Fajr prayer arrives precisely when it arrives, calculated by the position of the sun relative to the horizon, and you can own every gold mine in West Africa, which you essentially do. But you still can't buy yourself an extra 15 minutes of sleep when Allah expects your attention. The weight of consciousness brings with it the immediate pressure of an empire. Even in these first drowsy moments, your mind automatically begins cataloging the day's concerns. Reports from the Bambuk goldfields, news from the salt mines of Tagaza, trade disputes along the Niger River, a delegation of merchants from Cairo who've been waiting 3 days for an audience. The constant, grinding mathematics of managing wealth that spans continents. But right now, in this particular darkness, none of that matters. The palace architecture helps create this bubble of intimacy. The way the courtyards and corridors channel sound, the thickness of the walls that muffle the outside world, the careful positioning of rooms that gives each space its own acoustic signature. Your sleeping quarters feel separate from the vast machinery of governance that surrounds them, a pocket of personal space in an existence that belongs more to Mali than to you. You sit up slowly, feeling the cool air touch your shoulders. The cotton sleeping robe, soft from countless washings, practical rather than ornate, shifts around you like a gentle reminder that some comforts have nothing to do with price. Your feet find the reed mat beside the bed, and the texture grounds you in the present moment, away from the endless calculations of empire management. The profound irony of your situation settles over you like morning mist. You could command the construction of the most elaborate wake-up ritual imaginable, servants with instruments, choreographed presentations of luxury, a daily parade of your accumulated wealth. Instead, you're about to spend the next 20 minutes doing exactly what every practicing Muslim in your empire will do this morning. Your enormous wealth waits patiently in treasuries and trade routes and distant mines, but what comes next requires nothing more than consciousness and intention. Here's what's fascinating. You control more gold than entire kingdoms, yet you're about to prostrate yourself on a simple woven mat, just like the poorest farmer in your empire. The psychological shift that's about to happen in the next 20 minutes is more dramatic than any political transformation you could decree. One moment you're the undisputed master of West Africa's economic destiny. The next, you're face down on wool and cotton, acknowledging that you control absolutely nothing. The ablution process begins with water that's been drawn from the same wells your subjects use, stored in simple clay vessels that cost less than the daily tribute from a single gold mine. You pour the cool water over your hands 3 times, the liquid catching the pre-dawn light as it runs between your fingers. The sensation is identical to what every practicing Muslim in Niani experiences this morning. The slight shock of cold water on warm skin, the careful attention to washing each finger, the ritualized cleansing that transforms ordinary well water into something spiritually significant. You rinse your mouth 3 times, then your nostrils, then your face. The water drips onto the stone floor with soft pattering sounds that echo slightly in the chamber. Your arms come next. Right first, then left, washing from fingertips to elbows with the methodical precision that Islamic law requires. The physical routine is almost meditative, each gesture performed exactly as prescribed, creating a rhythm that's remained unchanged since the Prophet's time. The wet hands pass over your head once, dampening the hair, then move to clean your ears inside and out. Finally, your feet, right then left, washed from toes to ankles while balanced carefully on one leg. The entire process takes perhaps 10 minutes, but it accomplishes something that all your accumulated wealth cannot. It makes you temporarily identical to every other Muslim preparing for dawn prayer. Your prayer mat waits where you positioned it the night before, oriented precisely toward Mecca using calculations that your court astronomers update regularly. The mat itself is unremarkable. Geometric patterns in deep blue and gold thread, woven by artisans whose names you'll never know. It's clean, functional, and completely democratic in its simplicity. The wealthiest person alive kneels on the same quality of mat as merchants, farmers, and slaves throughout your empire. You begin with the opening recitation, Arabic words that sound identical whether spoken in a mud hut or a palace chamber. Allahu Akbar. God is greatest. And immediately, the vast machinery of imperial administration becomes irrelevant. Your forehead touches the mat during the first prostration, and the texture of woven wool against your skin provides the same tactile experience that unites Muslims from Cordoba to Cairo. The sounds that accompany this ritual create an acoustic landscape of collective worship. From beyond the palace walls, you hear the distant calls to prayer echoing from Niani's mosques, the voices of muezzins creating overlapping layers of the same ancient invitation. Closer by, the whisper of your cotton robes against stone provides a gentle percussion, while your controlled breathing creates its own rhythm between the recited verses. Each prostration strips away another layer of worldly authority. During sujud, with your forehead pressed firmly against the mat, you're physically lower than the humblest beggar in your kingdom. The Arabic phrases flow with practiced ease, the same words in the same order that structure the spiritual lives of millions of your subjects. For these moments, the Mali Empire operates without your direct supervision, a reminder that earthly power is always temporary stewardship. This daily ritual connects you to something larger than continental trade networks or military hierarchies. Every practicing Muslim across your vast territories performs these identical movements at precisely the same time, creating a moment of universal equality that transcends social boundaries. The richest man alive becomes indistinguishable from the poorest when both are prostrate before Allah. The prayer concludes with final recitations and the traditional greeting of peace, first to the right, then to the left. You remain seated briefly on the mat, hands resting on your knees, allowing the transition back to worldly consciousness to occur gradually. Around you, the palace begins its gradual awakening as servants start their own morning routines. As your prayers end, you become aware of something unsettling. You can hear the exact moment when your wealth starts working, and it sounds nothing like coins clinking. It starts with the soft shuffle of bare feet on stone corridors, followed by the gentle scrape of clay water vessels being lifted from their rests. This is the sound of your fortune awakening, person by person, task by mundane task. The palace breathes around you with the gradual rhythm of an organism coming to life. Water splashes softly as servants draw from the wells in the central courtyard, the sound echoing off adobe walls with that particular acoustic signature of enclosed spaces. Someone lights the first cooking fire, and you hear the gentle whoosh of tinder catching, followed by the methodical placement of fuel that suggests this person has performed this exact sequence hundreds of times before. The spiritual peace you've just experienced during prayer doesn't so much end as gets steadily crowded out by the returning weight of empire. Each sound represents a thread in the vast economic web that centers on your authority. The grinding of grain in the palace kitchens isn't just breakfast preparation. It's the sound of surplus from distant farms being converted into the calories that sustain your administrative apparatus. Charming, really. You hear soft conversations beginning in Arabic and local languages, the careful murmur of people coordinating the day's work. A servant mentions that merchants from the Bambuk goldfields arrived late last night. Another voice responds with something about tribute payments from river towns. Even these mundane exchanges carry the weight of continental commerce, each casual comment representing wealth flows that could finance small kingdoms. The hierarchy of awakening reveals itself through sound and timing. The essential staff, cooks, water carriers, fire tenders, began their day an hour ago. Palace guards have been rotating shifts all night, but now you hear the deliberate footsteps of the day watch taking their positions. The administrative staff won't stir for another hour, and the various courtiers and advisors who fill your daily schedule are probably still unconscious, dreaming of whatever court functionaries dream about. Probably not gold mines. What's fascinating about controlling unimaginable wealth is how it creates layers of isolation even within a crowded palace. Certain sounds never reach your quarters. The actual grinding labor of maintaining the compound, the arguments over work assignments, the private conversations where people speak honestly about conditions. You're surrounded by hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend entirely on your continued breathing. Yet whole categories of human experience remain acoustically invisible from your position. The shuffle of sandaled feet increases as more servants begin their tasks. Someone sweeps the courtyard with rhythmic strokes. Clay vessels clink softly as the day's water supply gets distributed to various work areas. The sound of wood being split for cooking fires carries that sharp crack that speaks of controlled violence applied to practical purposes. Each noise represents economic activity flowing toward and through your authority like tributaries feeding a river. Your chamber door remains closed, but the sounds penetrate anyway. The palace architecture ensures that you're never completely isolated from the machinery of your own wealth. Adobe walls muffle but don't eliminate sound, creating this peculiar intimacy where privacy becomes relative rather than absolute. You can hear your fortune working, even when you're not directly supervising it. Someone approaches your quarters, the soft footsteps of a personal servant, probably carrying the customary morning report on overnight developments. This person has walked these corridors for years, knows exactly how to move without disturbing your devotions, understands the precise timing that governs your daily routine. Their footsteps pause respectfully outside your chamber, waiting for the appropriate moment to request entry. The truth about being the richest person who ever lived settles over you like morning mist. You never truly have a private moment because every breath you take affects thousands of lives across continents. Your decisions about when to wake up, what to eat, who to see first. These personal choices ripple outward through trade networks and administrative hierarchies until they impact people you'll never meet in places you'll never visit. The soft knock on your door arrives precisely on schedule, carried by advisors and administrators who've been preparing since before dawn to seek your attention. You're about to discover that managing more wealth than you know what to do with doesn't involve counting gold coins. It involves trusting people you've never met, with numbers that could feed entire cities. The knock on your chamber door brings your first administrative advisor, a man whose entire existence revolves around translating distant realities into digestible reports. He carries a leather satchel containing scrolls that represent more wealth than most kingdoms will see in a century, and frankly, half of it might be complete fiction. The morning briefing begins with the Bambuk goldfields, roughly 800 miles southeast of your palace. Your mine supervisor there, a man you appointed 3 years ago and have seen exactly twice, sends word that last month's extraction yielded 400 pounds of raw gold. Fantastic. But here's the delicious uncertainty that haunts every morning. This supervisor could be skimming 20% off the top, and you wouldn't know until someone made the 4-month round trip to investigate, by which time he could have retired to a nice estate somewhere with your gold funding his comfortable anonymity. The salt deposits at Tagaza present even more creative opportunities for embezzlement. Your trade route manager reports that 47 caravans departed last month, carrying salt bars worth roughly 6,000 gold pieces. The mathematics seem reasonable, the documentation looks official, and absolutely none of it can be verified without sending trusted representatives on journeys that take longer than most military campaigns. Medieval wealth management is essentially an elaborate exercise in long-distance faith. Your advisor unfurls another scroll detailing tribute payments from river towns along the Niger. Each settlement owes specific percentages based on population, agricultural output, and trade volume. The numbers look appropriately impressive on parchment, but behind each figure lurks the fundamental question that keeps wealthy rulers awake at night. Are these people lying to you? The governor of Gao reports collecting tribute from 37 merchant vessels this month. Sounds reasonable. Could easily be 17 vessels with 20 fictional ones padding his personal retirement fund. The psychological weight of processing this information creates its own peculiar form of mental exhaustion. Your brain automatically performs calculations that would make modern accountants weep, converting gold weights to salt equivalents, estimating transport costs across desert routes, factoring seasonal variations in trade volume. Each report triggers cascading questions about market fluctuations, political stability, and the personal integrity of people whose names you struggle to remember. The coded message system adds another layer of delightful paranoia to your morning routine. Important communications arrive written in symbols that theoretically prevent interception by rivals or bandits. Your correspondence with distant provinces resembles cryptographic puzzles, with numerical codes representing everything from gold quantities to personnel changes. Of course, if someone's determined to deceive you, they can simply encode lies instead of truth. Revolutionary concept. Trade route reports arrive with the regularity of seasonal migrations, each document representing months of travel and commercial activity spanning thousands of miles. Your advisor mentions that merchants from Egypt are requesting exclusive access to certain salt routes, while traders from the Maghreb want guarantees about gold availability for the spring trading season. These aren't simple business decisions. They're diplomatic negotiations where saying yes to one party automatically creates enemies among their competitors. The volume of information creates a curious form of administrative vertigo. Gold mine productivity reports from regions you've never visited. Tax collection summaries from provinces you couldn't locate on a map. Trade volume estimates from caravan routes that exist primarily as theoretical lines drawn across endless desert. Your empire operates on a scale that makes personal verification impossible, forcing you to trust intermediaries who could be systematically robbing you blind. The morning briefing concludes with your advisor's respectful withdrawal, leaving you alone with scrolls full of numbers that represent more wealth than human imagination can properly grasp. Being the richest person alive means living with the constant knowledge that your fortune exists mostly as reports you must trust but cannot verify. Your wealth is simultaneously enormous and theoretical, documented and invisible, controlled and completely beyond your direct supervision. The sound of approaching footsteps announces the arrival of merchants and traders who've traveled impossible distances to seek your attention. The dust cloud appears first, rolling across the horizon like a small sandstorm with purpose, followed by the rhythmic complaints of camels who've spent months crossing the Sahara and the sharp calls of caravan leaders organizing their arrival. What nobody tells you about being the richest man alive in the 14th century is that every visitor wants something, and determining what that is becomes a deadly serious game. The choreography of unloading a trans-Saharan caravan resembles a carefully rehearsed dance performed by people who've done this countless times before. Camels kneel with theatrical groans, their loads shifting with soft thumps as leather sacks hit the ground. The smell hits you next. A mixture of exotic spices, unwashed travelers, camel hair, and something indefinably foreign that speaks of distant markets and different climates. It's the scent of opportunity mixed with potential disaster. Your court assembles with practiced efficiency. Everyone understands that examining foreign goods requires diplomatic skills roughly equivalent to negotiating a peace treaty. These merchants have traveled impossible distances, carrying items you've never seen from places you've never visited, and they're about to propose exchange rates based on market conditions that fluctuate with political winds across 3 continents. Delightful. The sensory experience becomes overwhelming almost immediately. Silk glides through your fingers. Ivory tusks carved with foreign script. Spices cloud the air with unfamiliar scents. Your mind automatically calculates their value against equivalent weights of gold dust, while your eyes water from aromatic clouds that represent months of skilled labor from distant workshops. The mathematics of international trade require mental gymnastics that would challenge modern economists. How do you determine fair value for goods from places where a day's wages might equal a month's income in your empire? The merchants propose exchange rates, where a camelload of salt trades for dozens of mithquals of gold, depending on location. 8 to 10 mithquals at Walata, 20 to 30 in Mali proper. These commercial relationships extend far beyond simple buying and selling. Agreeing to purchase copper from Takeda means establishing ongoing political relationships with northern territories. Accepting exclusive access to certain salt routes creates dependencies that could affect regional stability for decades. Every handshake represents a geopolitical chess move disguised as a business transaction. But among the gifts lies a request that could reshape your empire's fortunes, one that will require you to perform the very essence of imperial authority for an audience that's traveled continents to witness it. The afternoon audience chamber transforms you from a person into a living symbol of wealth so vast that people need to see it performed to believe it exists. The transformation begins with your formal robes. Heavy cotton weaves dyed in deep indigo and decorated with gold thread patterns that catch light like tiny suns. Each garment weighs roughly what a farmer might carry to market, and wearing them for hours creates a peculiar form of physical ritual where looking effortless requires considerable effort. The ceremonial head wrap alone contains enough gold thread to fund a small military expedition. Your advisors position it with mathematical precision, each fold calculated to create specific visual effects depending on viewing angle. The weight settles across your shoulders like a gentle but persistent reminder that you're no longer acting as yourself. You're embodying the concept of ultimate wealth for people who need concrete evidence that such abundance actually exists. The formal audience chamber fills with carefully arranged symbolic objects that tell stories about your empire's reach. Salt balls from Tagaza rest on wooden stands, their crystalline surfaces reflecting afternoon light. Gold dust sits in precisely measured bowls, creating small pyramids that represent months of mining labor. Ivory tusks lean against silk cushions, their carved surfaces depicting scenes of prosperity and divine blessing. Every item serves as both decoration and proof of concept. Your afternoon schedule resembles an elaborate court ritual where the script changes constantly, but the role remains identical. Provincial governors present tribute with elaborate speeches about your wisdom and generosity. Merchants request exclusive trading privileges using flowery language that barely conceals their mathematical calculations about profit margins. Religious leaders seek your blessing for new mosque construction, projects like the ones your architect, Al-Saheli, designed in Timbuktu and Gao, monuments that will outlast empires and serve as permanent testimony to your cultural investments. The psychological toll of constant ceremonial performance creates its own peculiar exhaustion. Every gesture must convey authority without arrogance, wealth without waste, accessibility without familiarity. You listen to requests with practiced attention, your face maintaining the precise expression that suggests both consideration and ultimate decision-making power. Court protocol dictates that you never appear hurried, confused, or uncertain about anything, regardless of your actual knowledge or feelings. The barrier between ruler and reality thickens with each scripted interaction. Genuine human connection becomes almost impossible when every conversation carries the weight of continental commerce. People address your wealth rather than your personality, responding to your authority rather than your actual thoughts. The richest person alive discovers that extreme fortune creates profound isolation even in crowded rooms. Medieval African court culture competed directly with the ceremonial traditions of other world powers, particularly the Islamic courts of North Africa and the Middle East. Your afternoon performances needed to project authority that could command respect from rulers who controlled their own impressive territories. Every gesture contributed to a reputation that extended far beyond Mali's borders, creating expectations that required constant maintenance. As the afternoon light begins to fade through the palace windows, you sense the approaching transition from public symbol back to private individual, a shift that brings its own complicated relief. The final council meeting before dusk brings military dispatches that require your immediate attention, reports from border provinces, updates on trade route security, intelligence about neighboring kingdoms' troop movements. Your war council assembles in the smaller chamber adjacent to your audience hall, their faces carrying the solemn weight of decisions that could affect thousands of lives. Every decision ripples across tributaries of your domain, creating consequences that will unfold long after you've forgotten the specific conversation that triggered them. As darkness falls over your empire, you understand the cruelest irony of being the richest person who ever lived. You have everything, which means you have everything to lose, and that knowledge follows you into sleep like an unwelcome companion. The palace settles around you with the gradual rhythm of an enormous organism winding down. Oil lamps flicker in distant corridors, their flames creating dancing shadows that transform familiar spaces into something slightly mysterious. The adobe walls release the day's accumulated heat with soft settling sounds, tiny creaks and sighs that speak of stone and mortar, expanding and contracting with the temperature changes. Your evening routine begins with the careful removal of ceremonial robes that have weighed on your shoulders for hours. Each garment represents a different aspect of imperial performance: the gold-threaded head wrap that proclaimed your authority, the heavy cotton robes that displayed your wealth, the symbolic jewelry that reminded everyone of your continental reach. Shedding these layers feels like emerging from an elaborate costume, each piece removed revealing more of the ordinary human underneath all that performed magnificence. The transition from public ruler to private person requires deliberate mental effort. Your mind automatically reviews the day's decisions, cataloging potential consequences that could ripple across trade routes for months. Did you promise too much to the merchants from Cairo? Will the tribute adjustments for river towns create resentment among provincial governors? These questions circle through your consciousness like vultures, each one representing another thread in the vast web of responsibility that never truly releases its grip. The loneliness of extreme wealth settles over you like evening mist, creating profound isolation even within a palace crowded with hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on your continued breathing. Every conversation carries the weight of continental commerce. Every relationship gets filtered through questions of political advantage or economic benefit. Medieval rulers processed these psychological burdens without modern support systems, relying instead on faith, ritual, and the simple passage of time to manage responsibilities that could crush ordinary minds. Evening prayers provide your final refuge from worldly concerns, the familiar Arabic phrases creating a bridge between material anxiety and spiritual contemplation. Tomorrow will bring the same cycle, but tonight, even the richest person alive must find peace in surrender. Here's the thing about following Mansa Musa through a single day. His greatest wealth wasn't the gold mines or trade routes or the fortune that destabilized entire economies. It was something far more valuable and infinitely harder to maintain: the ability to remain human while carrying the weight of unimaginable responsibility. Every morning, the richest person who ever lived knelt on the same simple prayer mat as the poorest farmer in his empire. Every evening, he faced the same fundamental questions about mortality and meaning that keep ordinary people awake at night. His real treasure wasn't measured in pounds of gold dust, but in moments of genuine surrender, in the daily choice to acknowledge something greater than earthly wealth. Maybe true richness has less to do with what we accumulate and more to do with what we're willing to release. Your bank account might not rival medieval Mali, but you face the same challenge Mansa Musa confronted each dawn: finding peace with the knowledge that all earthly possessions are temporary, that real contentment comes through gratitude rather than acquisition. Even the most powerful people in history found peace only in surrender and sleep. Rest well, knowing that tomorrow offers its own opportunities for both wealth and wisdom. The Lighthouse Keepers of Alexandria. You probably picture them as noble guardians standing majestically atop their wonder of the world. The reality? They spent most of their time scrubbing bird droppings off mirrors, hauling tons of fuel up endless stairs, and praying their fire wouldn't go out during storms. These weren't just watchmen. They were engineers, meteorologists, and navigators rolled into one grimy, exhausted package. You probably imagine the Pharos burning with some mystical clean flame, maybe olive oil or precious cedar wood, creating a noble beacon across the Mediterranean. Picture fragrant smoke drifting elegantly from the top of humanity's greatest lighthouse, a romantic fire worthy of the ancient world's most celebrated wonder. The reality was considerably less poetic and infinitely more pungent. The primary fuel for Alexandria's magnificent lighthouse was animal dung mixed with wood scraps. Not the aromatic cedar logs of your imagination, but dried manure from camels, donkeys, and goats, combined with whatever timber scraps the harbor could provide. This created thick, acrid smoke that filled the lighthouse's top chamber with a choking haze that made breathing an exercise in endurance. The keepers didn't tend a noble flame. They managed what was essentially a giant dung furnace, perched 330 feet above the Mediterranean. The logistics alone were staggering. Every single day, keepers hauled tons of this dried manure up the lighthouse's internal ramps and stairways, using wicker baskets that left their hands raw and bleeding from constant friction. Imagine carrying basket after basket of compressed animal waste, climbing the equivalent of a 30-story building, knowing you'd have to repeat the process tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that for as long as you held the job. The smoke didn't just smell terrible. It was genuinely toxic. Keepers developed chronic coughs that racked their bodies day and night. Their eyes turned permanently bloodshot from constant irritation. The thick smoke filled every corner of the lighthouse's top chamber, making it impossible to escape even when sleeping. These men essentially lived inside a giant chimney, breathing concentrated smoke from burning excrement for months at a time. Mediterranean weather made everything worse. When rain swept across Alexandria, the fuel became soggy and nearly impossible to ignite. Keepers had to sleep next to their fuel stores to keep them dry with their own body heat. During humid periods, the dung absorbed moisture from the air, turning what should have been a quick-burning fuel into a smoldering mess that produced even thicker, more choking smoke. Storms created genuine crises. When supply ships couldn't dock due to rough seas, keepers faced the nightmare scenario of running out of fuel entirely. They burned furniture, their own clothes, or anything combustible they could find to keep the light alive. Some desperate keepers reportedly tore apart sections of wooden fixtures inside the lighthouse itself, feeding the structure to its own fire just to maintain the beacon for another night. The quantities required were enormous. Estimates suggest the Pharos consumed over 2 tons of fuel each month just for basic operations. 2 tons of dried manure and wood scraps had to be collected, transported by ship to Alexandria's harbor, then carried piece by piece up hundreds of feet of stone stairs. The entire operation resembled less a noble calling and more an industrial-scale waste management system. The lighthouse's design included internal shafts meant to vent some of the smoke, but they were hopelessly inadequate. Keepers developed survival strategies, rotating shifts to limit exposure, covering their faces with cloth, positioning themselves near the few air vents during breaks. These measures offered minimal relief from an environment that was slowly poisoning them. Successful lighthouse keeping had nothing to do with noble vigilance or romantic dedication to maritime safety. It was about mastering the unglamorous art of manure management and developing the physical resilience to survive in a toxic, smoke-filled environment day after day. This constant battle with fuel logistics shaped every aspect of how keepers organized their lives, determined their daily routines, and ultimately influenced their survival strategies within the ancient world's most demanding workplace. The ingenious bronze mirror system that amplified the Pharos' flames sounds impressive until you realize someone had to keep those mirrors spotless in an environment designed to corrode metal. These weren't decorative pieces tucked safely inside a palace. They were massive reflective surfaces exposed to everything the Mediterranean could throw at them, and they had to stay perfectly clean to work at all. The lighthouse's entire reputation depended on polished bronze reflectors that could focus firelight into a beam visible for 35 miles at sea. Without these mirrors, the Pharos was just an expensive tower with a campfire on top. The reflectors caught the flame and redirected it seaward in a concentrated beam that could punch through darkness and guide ships safely to Alexandria's harbor. This wasn't decorative lighting, It was precision optics that kept the ancient world's busiest port functioning. The relentless assault began the moment the sun rose. Salt spray from Mediterranean waves coated the bronze surfaces with a film that clouded them within hours. The thick smoke from burning dung settled on every reflective surface, mixing with salt to create a grimy paste that ate into the metal itself. Seabirds treated the lighthouse as their personal perch, leaving a constant rain of corrosive droppings that actually dissolved bronze over time. Every morning, keepers climbed to the mirror chamber carrying buckets of vinegar and sand. They scrubbed each reflector surface by hand, using abrasive compounds that slowly wore away their skin along with the grime. The vinegar ate through the accumulated filth, while sand provided the friction needed to restore the mirror's shine. This wasn't quick work. Each surface required methodical scrubbing to remove layers of salt, smoke, and bird waste. The Mediterranean seabirds created their own special hell. They attacked keepers who tried to clean around active roosts, diving at anyone who disturbed their territory. Some keepers developed permanent scars from bird claws, while others learned to work around nesting seasons when the creatures were most aggressive. The droppings themselves were acidic enough to pit the bronze if left untreated, creating permanent damage that reduced the mirror's effectiveness. Winter storms brought fresh torments. Salt crystals formed thick crusts on every surface that had to be scraped off with bronze tools. Keepers worked in howling winds that threatened to blow them off the platform while they chipped away at salt deposits that reformed faster than they could remove them. The precision required was extraordinary. Mirrors had to be angled perfectly to catch firelight and redirect it seaward, meaning keepers needed working knowledge of geometry alongside cleaning endurance. These men weren't just janitors with impressive job locations. They were ancient optical engineers who understood metallurgy, weather patterns, and the principles of light reflection. They knew which cleaning compounds worked best in different conditions, how to adjust mirror angles for seasonal changes in the sun's position, and how to maintain bronze surfaces under impossible conditions. This technical expertise elevated their status far beyond simple laborers in Alexandrian society. You might assume lighthouse keepers were just desperate men willing to climb stairs for coins, but Alexandria's harbor was too valuable to trust to anyone without serious qualifications. The Pharos wasn't some decorative monument. It was the economic lifeline of the Mediterranean's busiest port, where miscalculation could sink fortunes along with ships. Alexandria's prosperity depended entirely on maritime trade, and that trade depended on keepers who knew what they were doing. The selection process was rigorous enough to make modern job interviews look casual. Candidates faced tests on navigation knowledge that would challenge experienced sea captains. They had to demonstrate they could read wind patterns by watching cloud movements, identify approaching storms hours before they hit, and recognize different ship types by their silhouettes alone. This wasn't academic knowledge. It was life or death expertise that separated competent keepers from men who got people killed. Prospective keepers stood on Alexandria's harbor walls during various weather conditions, calling out wind directions and storm predictions while officials checked their accuracy against known weather patterns. They identified merchant vessels, military ships, and fishing boats from distances that made them mere specks on the horizon. Wrong answers eliminated candidates immediately. These men needed to guide ships through Alexandria's complex currents and hidden rocks, not just wave torches around. The physical tests were brutal. Candidates carried heavy loads up hundreds of stairs repeatedly while officials timed them. They worked in artificially smoke-filled chambers to prove they wouldn't faint from the toxic fumes they'd breathe daily. They balanced on narrow platforms during high winds, demonstrating they could maintain their footing while adjusting mirrors or hauling fuel in dangerous conditions. Many candidates quit during these trials rather than risk injury. Social requirements were equally demanding. Keepers needed literacy skills to maintain detailed logs recording ship movements, weather conditions, and notable incidents. They required diplomatic abilities to communicate with ship captains from across the Mediterranean, each with different languages and customs. Most importantly, they had to prove they were trustworthy enough to resist bribes from smugglers seeking to avoid port inspections or hide illegal cargo. Many successful candidates came from backgrounds in seafaring or harbor work. Former sailors understood Alexandria's seasonal weather patterns, while dock workers knew the harbor's hidden hazards and tricky currents. These men brought existing knowledge that could be adapted to lighthouse work rather than starting from complete ignorance about maritime conditions. The demanding selection process created something resembling a professional guild. Lighthouse keeping required apprenticeships, where experienced keepers trained newcomers in specialized techniques. Knowledge passed from generation to generation. How to angle mirrors for maximum effectiveness, which fuel combinations burned cleanest, how to predict weather from subtle atmospheric signs. This created professional standards and mutual support among keepers. Lighthouse keepers were among Alexandria's most skilled technical professionals, combining expertise that today would require separate specialists. They were navigators who understood currents and wind patterns, engineers who maintained complex mirror systems, and meteorologists who predicted weather from natural signs. Their knowledge of optics, metallurgy, and atmospheric conditions made them valuable beyond their lighthouse duties. This professional status affected everything about their lives. Unlike common laborers, keepers commanded respect in Alexandrian society. Their specialized knowledge made them consulted experts on maritime matters. Ship captains sought their advice about weather conditions. Harbor officials relied on their navigation expertise, and merchants valued their ability to predict when ships might arrive or face delays. Their elevated status translated into higher pay than typical manual workers received. The pharaohs had living quarters built right into its massive structure, which sounds cozy until you realize you're essentially camping inside a giant chimney that never stops smoking. These weren't guest rooms at some seaside inn. They were survival bunkers carved into limestone walls, designed to house families who had nowhere else to go when their shift lasted months at a time. The chambers themselves were carved directly into the lighthouse's thick limestone walls. Each room measured barely 8 feet square, yet somehow had to accommodate entire families. A keeper, his wife, and their children all squeezed into these stone boxes that felt more like tombs than homes. The walls were always damp from sea spray that penetrated through tiny cracks, while the constant vibration from wind and waves made everything rattle continuously. Every breath inside these quarters was a struggle. Smoke from the furnace above seeped through every gap in the stone, filling the rooms with thick, choking haze that made the air almost unbreathable. Every meal tasted like charcoal because the smoke coated everything. Food, clothing, bedding, even the water they drank. The sleeping pallets reeked of smoke mixed with dampness from Mediterranean spray, creating a smell that clung to your skin and hair permanently. Water was precious beyond belief. Every single drop had to be either hauled up from ground level or collected from rain in whatever containers they could find. Clay jars served as storage, but the building's constant vibration cracked them regularly, sending precious water leaking across stone floors. Children learned early to catch drips in their hands rather than waste a single drop. Food storage presented its own nightmare. The humid, smoky environment spoiled provisions faster than anyone could eat them. Bread grew mold within days. Dried meat turned slimy and rotten. Cheese developed strange colors that definitely weren't supposed to be there. Rats climbed up from Alexandria's harbor, following the scent of food stores and making themselves at home in the lighthouse's lower levels before working their way up to the living quarters. The isolation was perhaps worse than the physical discomfort. Lighthouse families were cut off from Alexandria's bustling street life, its markets, its festivals, its normal human interactions. For weeks at a time, they saw nobody except each other and the occasional ship captain who climbed up to check conditions. Children grew up knowing more about wind patterns than playground games, more about ship signals than neighborhood gossip. Sleep was constantly disrupted. Wind howled through the structure day and night, creating sounds that ranged from low groans to sharp whistles. Waves crashed against the base with thunderous booms that shook the entire building. Ship signals came at all hours. Horn blasts, bell ringing, shouted messages that echoed up through the lighthouse's internal chambers. The ever-present fear of fire spreading from the furnace to the living quarters kept everyone in a state of nervous alertness. Yet somehow these families adapted. Children learned to navigate the tower stairs and passages blindfolded, moving through the structure with confidence that would amaze visitors. Wives became expert weather predictors, reading atmospheric signs better than most sailors. They developed their own microculture within the lighthouse walls, creating routines and traditions that helped them survive the isolation and harsh conditions. The lighthouse families formed a tight-knit community bonded by shared hardship and mutual dependence. They had to work together to survive, supporting each other through the constant challenges of their unusual home. This unity became essential when they faced their greatest tests, maintaining the light during Alexandria's legendary Mediterranean storms. The last lighthouse keepers of Alexandria had the heartbreaking job of maintaining a wonder of the world that was literally falling apart beneath their feet. By the 14th century, these men climbed stairs that shifted underfoot, tended fires in chambers where cracks ran through solid stone, and listened to their workplace groan ominously every time Mediterranean winds picked up speed. Centuries of earthquakes had turned the Faroes into a structural nightmare. Major seismic events in 956 and 1303 AD had shattered the lighthouse's integrity, with the 1303 Crete earthquake collapsing the entire top section and reducing the once towering structure to a fraction of its original height. Keepers worked knowing that any tremor might bring down what remained of their ancient workplace. These 14th century keepers faced an impossible situation. Ships still depended on their light for safe harbor entry, but the lighthouse could collapse at any moment. They climbed unstable stairs that swayed during storms, hauled fuel through passages where loose stones fell without warning, and maintained fires in chambers where the ceiling might cave in during their sleep. The constant threat of sudden death became just another job hazard. Repairs became exercises in creative desperation. Keepers used rubble from fallen sections to patch holes in walls, creating makeshift barriers against wind and rain. They rigged rope systems to replace damaged stairs, turning sections of the lighthouse into climbing challenges that would terrify modern safety inspectors. When the top became too dangerous, they moved the fire to lower levels, accepting reduced effectiveness rather than certain death. The lighthouse's reduced height meant dramatically shorter light range. What once projected a beam visible for over 20 miles now struggled to reach ships just a few miles offshore. The mirror system, already compromised by structural damage, couldn't be properly maintained when keepers couldn't safely access the reflector chambers. Fuel systems barely functioned in a structure where wind whistled through cracks and rain poured through damaged stone. As the lighthouse became less reliable, the prestigious keeper positions lost their appeal and their pay. The skilled professionals who once competed for these roles moved on to safer work, leaving only the most desperate men willing to risk their lives for diminishing wages. The quality of lighthouse keeping declined along with the structure itself, creating a cycle where poor maintenance accelerated the building's deterioration. The final abandonment came when keepers lit torch fires ashore rather than risk a collapse. Alexandria moved on. The decision marked the end of active lighthouse operations after 15 centuries of continuous service. By 1480, Mamluk Sultan Qaitbay Bey repurposed the stones for his new fort, ending the Faroes' long tenure. After active service of 500 years, it inspired innumerable lighthouses across the empire. These forgotten professionals maintained one of humanity's greatest achievements until the very end, their expertise dying with the structure they served. They kept the light burning through impossible conditions, adapting and improvising as their workplace crumbled around them, proving that human dedication could outlast even the most impressive monuments. Lighthouse keepers were the invisible engineers who kept ancient Alexandria's economy alive, combining technical expertise with backbreaking labor in ways modern lighthouse automation has made us forget. They weren't romantic guardians standing nobly against the sea. They were skilled professionals who understood optics, metallurgy, and weather prediction, while breathing toxic smoke and hauling tons of manure up endless stairs. Their story reveals that even humanity's greatest wonders required ordinary people doing extraordinary work under difficult conditions. Every ancient wonder we admire today was maintained by skilled professionals whose names history forgot, but whose expertise made the impossible seem effortless.